Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. And welcome to the 10th East-West workshop on industrial archaeology. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. And in particular, thanks for the speakers who are going to share with us their very interesting research. I guess most of you already know me, but anyway, I am Juan Manuel Cano Sanchez from the Council of the Association of Industrial Archaeology, and also I'm an associate professor at the University of Science and Technology Beijing in China. As you already know, this workshop, this edition of the workshop is somehow special because this May makes exactly 5 years since we host our first workshop in May 2021. When we did so, actually, we did it as a way of keeping ongoing our international academic activities, international exchanges, in a time in which still, at least international traveling was still affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So the workshop was not intended originally to be a long-term project, but here we are 5 years later, hosting the workshop number 10. So to celebrate this special occasion, 5 years of workshops and different editions, today we are going to discuss, to focus, to speak about alcoholic drinks, the archaeology, the heritage, and the history of alcoholic drinks. Of course, we are fully aware of the problems that alcohol abuse can produce in many different levels. So we just don't celebrate alcohol from an uncritical, even irresponsible position. But still, we acknowledge the historical, the cultural, and the heritage significance that alcoholic drinks have in many regions of the world. So today we are going to focus on these more historical and cultural aspects. And that is going to include first some malt from Britain and also continental Europe. As you know, malt is a key ingredient for the production of beer, whiskey, and other liqueurs. We will have also some wine from Spain, which, as everybody knows, is the best wine in the world. And finally, some baijiu from China that I believe perhaps is a drink that internationally is a little bit less known, but it is also very interesting and very much delicious, I must say. So, well, I'm sorry because we cannot provide the drinks, but I am sure that still you are going to enjoy the content of the lectures. As usual, we will have the three presentation first and at the end we will have some time for questions and answers. Even though we are going to make a little exception here, because Pablo, our second speaker today, he may need to leave after his presentation. So if there are any questions or comments for him, we better done them before he needs to go. So in any case, please, until the end of the workshop, until we have final discussion and question and answers section, please keep your cameras and your microphones off so we can focus better on the presentations. In the meantime, you are very welcome to use the chat facility of Zoom to make questions, comments, or to share any ideas that you feel you want to share. So that's for the introduction, and I think we can move directly to the first presentation that is going to be delivered by Amber Patrick under the title Malthouse Development, the late 18th century to the mid-20th century. Amber Patrick, she studied archaeology and geography at university, and after that, she spent most of her professional career as an archaeologist, first in Nottinghamshire, where she developed a series of surveys on the country's industries, including the malting industries of Nottinghamshire. So I believe that was her first contact with malting buildings, but that was going to be the beginning of a very long relationship, since the maltings became one of the main themes in Amber's research that was carried out in Nottinghamshire, but also in other parts of England, and even looking at other regions of the world too. Her expertise in this topic is, of course, outstanding, as she has demonstrated with plenty of publications on the topic, including the book The Buildings of the Malting Industry, the production of malt from prehistory to the 21st century, which was published by Historic England and that was awarded last year the very prestigious Peter Neverson Award for outstanding scholarship in industrial archaeology. So this is the wall she is going to talk to us today. So Amber, please, when you are ready, the floor is yours.
Malt. I better go on to the second screen. To understand the buildings of the malting industry, we need to know what malt is. Malt is artificially germinated grain, which is usually, but certainly not exclusively, barley, with germination arrested by kilning at the critical point when the starches in the grain are turning to sugars. That is used in brewing, whiskey distilling, etc. The main type of malting process throughout this period was floor malting, and most of the images that I'm going to show you are of floor maltings, but not exclusively. And it was produced in specialist buildings most of the time. In this country, in other words, in the United Kingdom, pneumatic malting came into operation in the last quarter of the 19th century. To understand the process, you need to understand the buildings. And this is the typical layout that is shown in books, in exhibitions, in illustrations. And it is what I refer to as the linear system. Because at one end, you've got the steep. I won't go into couching, there isn't time for that. You've got germination, and beyond germination, you've got kilning, the kiln drying floor, and then malt out. However, it has to be noted that there is another system, and this is particularly widespread. It is also early, certainly from at least the early 17th century, which probably means that it was in operation from the 16th century. And this is referred to as the round and technically as the Newark pattern of malting. And you will notice that I've got a steep and I've got a kiln, and that they are adjacent to each other. In other words, you finish where you started. From the steep, you go along the germination floor and not up onto the next floor, but onto the top floor. And this is one of the defining factors of Newark maltings. They are virtually always three-story buildings, whereas the linear ones might be only two, or they might be considerably more, as you will see in due course. Returning to this, the germination of the piece is moved along that top floor and onto the kiln drying floor, which is either at the same level or possibly slightly below. And once kilning is complete, then the kilned malt is moved onto the storage floor. And so we'll start to look at the buildings, and I'm starting with the beginning, the linear buildings. And this is an 1806 building at Mistley in Essex. Does it look like a maltings? And the answer is, well, it might do. I know it is a maltings. There were another 7 on the site originally, and this one was already converted by the time I started looking at it in the 1990s. One of the features it does have, and which you will see in due course, are the regularly spaced windows, although there are rather too many of them. Does it have a kiln? Well, you can't see a kiln, but if you look at the far end, there, you will see there's a greyish structure, and between that and the main part of the building is a parapet wall, and it's important to remember that. We'll move on a bit. This is Nottinghamshire, Raglan Road, Retford, dated to 1838. There's documentary evidence that it was built at approximately that time. It fronts the Chesterfield Canal, and one of the things that is important, although certainly not exclusive, is the importance of communication, initially water, and then obviously the railways. Here we've got a four-storey large building, and it is worth noting that maltings, even at an early date, can be surprisingly large. Is it recognisable? The short answer is yes, it's got a kiln. If you look at it, you might think, well, that doesn't look as though it fits in with the rest of the building to the left of it. It may well be a replacement for the original one. The documentary evidence shows that there was a kiln in that position. So there we are, we've got that. Let's move on a bit to the 1850s, and this is Bass's Understaff Maltings, Wetmore Road in Burton-on-Trent. Large. We've only moved on about 15 years, and you can see the size of buildings that were being constructed by this date. It's 4 floors. Is it recognisable as a maltings? You might say, well, it's in Burton, it must be a maltings, or if it isn't, it's a brewery. Yes, it is recognised as a maltings, partly again because of the regularly spaced windows, in this case in every bay. They're large ones. One of the misnomers is that malting windows are always small. They may well be small, but just because the windows are large, it doesn't mean it isn't a maltings, it's the spacing. And here we have the kilns. And if you look at these kilns, they're not the same kiln as you've seen in the last slide. They've got what are referred to as ridge vent cowls. There are 2 of them. Their facade is fairly blank, and it is perhaps worth remembering that kilns often have blank facades. And then beyond them, nearest the camera, is the malt store and the out, where you get out the malt. Let's have a look at another linear one. All of these have been linear up to now. Bag Hill Road in Pontefract. Pontefract actually was a very important malting centre, a substantial number there in the 19th century. This one is probably 1870s, possibly 1880s. It's certainly in existence according to map evidence by the end of the 1880s. Is it a maltings? Well, it's got smallish, regularly spaced windows in every other bay. One elevation fronts directly onto Bag Hill Lane. No kiln at the other end. But you will notice that there is a parapet wall, and the likelihood is that the kiln was beyond that. Now, in theory, this could be either a linear malthouse or it could be a Newark pattern one. The likelihood is, in fact, it's linear, that the kiln is at the far end and that the steep was at the end here onto the road. And I have been into other malthouses in Pontefract, and quite a number of them. Pontefract is surprisingly hilly. They have the steep at the upper end, so to speak, the uphill end, and the kiln at the downhill end. So having decided that that probably is linear, but could be just a possibly Newark, we'll move on to a definitely Newark malthouse. This is at Hamlet House, Chetnall in Dorset, and it has a date stone of 1816 on it, and it is Newark pattern. There are earlier examples that I could have been, but one of the things that you will come to realise that maltings, images of maltings are difficult. They're large buildings, they're often difficult to photograph, and the lighting can be difficult, as you will see indoors. This one is a 3-storey malthouse. The open door gives onto the steeping system, and beyond that, actually in an extension, is the kiln. And you might say, well, it's large windows. Is the middle floor really any different? And if you look at the hoist door out, you will see that it matches almost to the level of the bottom floor window lintel, and almost to the top floor sill. In other words, indicating that that is a full height door, whereas the floors on either side are rather less so. And if I go to Newark, demolished Baird's Cliffnock Malting, Sydney Street, 1880s, and very clearly a Newark pattern. And I've included this image specifically because it is very easy to see that the middle floor is of greater height than the floors on either side. The kiln with the ridge vent kiln cowl is at the back, and adjacent to it, also at the back, was the steeping system. And still in Newark is Baird's Trentside Malting South Block. There is a North Block. They are of mass concrete. This one is dated to 1875. The list description refers to it as 57, but I think there was just a typing error because there is documentary evidence that this is 1875. And possibly this is one of the best examples of showing the difference. If you look along the bottom floor set of windows, there are round tie bar bosses, patras plates. And if you then look higher up, you will see there's another set under the top floor. And again, this indicates the depth of the middle floor. And if you move along to the right-hand side to the kiln, you will see that those plates there match almost exactly with the plates in the main part of the maltings. In other words, in this malt house, the kiln drying floor was at the same level as the top germination floor. Again, the kiln is at the back, and adjacent to it at the back is a steeping cistern. In between, as I come, in other words, between the 1870s and 1952, as you've got here, a substantial number of maltings were obviously built. They came of all sorts of shapes and sizes. You could get small Newark ones down in Devon of the 1870s, or you could get the extremely large 1904 Mistley maltings of Free Rodwell of 8 stories. All of those were more or less recognizable. In other words, they're maltings. I come now to the last floor maltings to be built in Britain, England. I don't like to say definitely Scotland or anywhere else. This is documented to 1952. It was Sanders were taken over by Pauls, and it was the last malt house to be built following bomb damage during the Second World War. Is it recognizable as of maltings of any sort? Well, yes, just about. It's got 2 kiln furnace cowls, but that's about all. In fact, it is a 4-floor building. It's got 2 ordinary floor germination floors, floor maltings, and subsequently salad in boxes were installed. It was highly mechanized. The actual floor turning machinery was mechanized and moved between floors. Steeps, conical steeps, which I'll show you in due course. There were barley drying drums. Again, mechanization and improvement was substantial in this maltings. It too has been demolished. So let's have a look at the interior. Top left hand is a stone steeping cistern. Until the repeal of the malt tax in 1880, steeps had to be flat bottomed. This happens to be in a stone building at Trowell Common in Wiltshire. Had it been in a brick building, it would have been brick. Move across to the right-hand side. With the repeal of the malt tax, you didn't have to have a flat-bottom steep, so you could have conical hopper-bottom ones. And because the top is always on one floor and the bottom is on the floor below, it's very difficult putting the two together. This one is in Gloucester, in ABM's, later ABM's maltings of 1901. And the hopper bottom shows the mechanization for emptying it. And there's still a bit of grain. Our bottom left is a conical one, a round one, and that was at Beeston Maltings in Nottinghamshire. It was installed in the 1920s when Shipstons took over the Beeston Brewery. Maltings there. Interiors. This is Albrew Maltsters Maltings, Sherwood Road Workshop in Nottinghamshire, dated to 1875. One of the things I come across is, well, there's nothing in the maltings, all the machinery's gone. There isn't machinery in the maltings unless it is a pneumatic maltings, which I will come on to. There is a lot of open space, and this typifies what is a proper, ordinary floor maltings germination floor. You can see 3 and I think, in fact, 4 rows of cast iron columns. This was a large building, and this is what you should find in a maltings. Also what you find, and I'm detailing them slightly more here, are these cast iron columns. This is at Barnetby again, 1875 date. These are slender ones. Originally, this was a storage floor. On storage floors, you do get less space. It can be open like this, or it can be divided up into timber box boxes, and they're made up by slotting timber beams, planks into timber beams. There is another reason why I've shown this particular maltings. You note that the cast iron columns finish at relatively slender beams, and that in between these beams is an arch, which in this case appears to be cemented over, and this is referred to as jack arching on the Dennett system. And this particular maltings is important because these plans were actually signed by Dennett. He designed the fireproofing of this maltings. You will find jack arching stroke the Dennett system in other maltings. However, it is important to note that though this is an 1875 date, they still continued building with timbers right up to the end of the century. Interiors, kiln furnaces. Top left is a basic primitive kiln furnace at Brockhampton, Sevenhampton, Gloucestershire, dated late 18th century. Moving into the middle is Chetnall, slightly more sophisticated. It has an iron door and it has ventilating hatches on either side. Moving to the top right, this is an outlier in the sense that it is in fact a barley kiln furnace of Warwick and Richardson's brewery maltings of the 1860s in Newark. It is important to note that fire basket furnaces on much larger scales were found in large maltings and continued into the 20th century, were used into the 20th century. They were, for example, Bass's plough maltings in Burton-on-Trent. They were at one time in Oldbury Maltsters at the Flax Mill maltings in Ditherington, Shrewsbury. I suspect that they were also at Bass's Sleaford maltings, and they were at the Trentside maltings in Newark. However, at the same time, you would also come across patent kilns, and this happens to be Robert Bowby's patent kiln at Ketton in Rutland. However, others were manufactured by H.J.H. King of Nailsworth, Buxton and Thornley of Burton-on-Trent. Frees of Mistley had their own, as did E.S. Bevans at Warminster. In the middle is a succès anthracite kiln, self-emptying hopper of anthracite into the fire below. It is worth pointing out that all of these, and I'll come on to the last one in a minute, the combustion gases go through the malt. It's direct heating. None of this is indirect heating. The last one is a very modern one. It's a German kiln, and it's a Versfeld kiln at Warminster Maltings. If you come across one of those, you know you're in the wrong period. The maltings itself is a floor maltings. I should say that anthracite was in use at Wolverhampton Dudley's maltings at Lichfield and Langley Green 2005, but other maltings, many of them transferred initially to oil firing and subsequently gas firing, but often they used them in parts of the patent kilns. Exteriors, kilns. The top left-hand one is a typical kiln roof. It would have had a cowl on originally. This is Malthouse Lane in Reading. In the middle is Midworth Street, Mansfield Brewery's Malthouse kiln, Midworth Street, Mansfield in Nottinghamshire. And obviously this maltings also was on a slope, and the drawer needed to take the hot air through the kiln, drying floor, was such that a large, tall cowl was needed. Then we move on to the right-hand side. This is a typical kiln of, in particular, Hertfordshire. This one happens to be in Ware, and the cowl that would have been on the top of the left-hand one is that one there, and it swivels into the wind and brings it through the hot air through the malt. Bottom pyramid. This is Chetnall in Dorset, and again, it is, even if the exterior doesn't show a pyramidal roof, it often is on the interior. And this is the Goat malting in Burton-on-Trent, and octagonal, the only one that I know of. Right-hand side is a double kiln at Barnetby, and here it is important to note the extensive timber work of the kiln structure. It was visible externally as such. Equipment. An Eldra Nelder screen, so you do get some on the left-hand side, and the bottom of a Bowby bucket elevator at Tattershall's Maltings in Ripon in North Yorkshire. And it is important to emphasize that conveying and elevation, especially in large maltings, were important. And in that context, you will often find line shafting. We'll now want to move on to the first pneumatic maltings of 1878 at Beeston Brewery. Doesn't look much like it. They changed the kiln. This was pneumatic. It was pre-1878, so you had a flat bottom steep, as is indicated. I've said it's pneumatic. It was not mechanical. The consequence was that a man had to get in and turn the grain in the boxes. If you look at the left-hand image, I think you'll see that the two sets of cast-iron columns are slightly closer together, and those are the ones on either side of the right, relate to the raised platform. The raised platform would have gone between those, and the boxes would have been on the right-hand side and the left-hand side of that. I don't have the early boxes, but by the 1852, and it's worth noting that this is the same time as the last floor maltings in Grimsby. This was built in Louth. Not again recognisable as a maltings, it was a Saladin box maltings, and the box, not from this maltings, but from Gainsborough, is on the right, and it's those screws that move up and down the box that make it mechanical. It was designed by Saladin, Jules Saladin from France, and we have the first one was the first recorded one was in Wainford in Norfolk, 1891. It was very expensive. It bankrupted the maltsters. We'll move on to drum maltings, patented by Galland, and this is 1896, although there is indications that there were earlier ones. It's a drum maltings. Would you know it from the exterior? And the short answer is probably not. You've got the kiln at one end, you've got regularly spaced windows. What you cannot see but was the design, which are the drums on the bottom and the steeps on the top. In other words, it's vertical as opposed to horizontal. And those are French and drums, much more modern, but I think it does indicate what drums are and how they operate. They go round. Not all were converted. Not all were new built, they were converted. Kilns, Muga kiln, and you can see the development here. This was by George Porteous of Leeds. It was inserted between an old kiln and a new one. I have to do more research on this. Again, it's a foreign one, and another one is Crisp Maltings at Gosford in Beccles, the German kiln of the mid-1930s, and it is here that I should mention double kilns. This had a double kiln, and so did a number of other maltings. It was very popular on the continent, and it was promoted by Henry Stokes, one of the main malting engineers. We didn't get on with them. All of them, as far as I know, went back to single kilning. This one did, as did Gloucester, as did Oldbury Maltsters in Ditherington and Flaxmill, and even a small one at Ashburton in Devon. And this is Paul's Maltings Saladin box plant at Lincolnshire. It just shows that if you're coming across modern maltings, that you will simply not recognise them. It is only the nameplate there that indicates what it was. I've mentioned two pneumatic processes. Certainly, secondary sources indicate floor malting was practiced in both northern France and Germany, as well as pneumatic systems, the latter of which were particularly well developed in Germany by World War II, where there was also the Muga kiln system, for example, well in operation for at least 50 years. From an English point of view, floor maltings designs were exported to New Zealand and South Africa in the 19th century, and in the 20th century, Robert Bobby exported a continuous malting system to Dominion Malting in Canada. I've put this in because I was actually queried about this. There is evidence of indirect kilning technology being transferred from England to Europe. I haven't found any evidence for this. But indirect kilning was certainly in use on the continent by the mid-20th century. Thank you very much. And that's the acknowledgements.
Okay, thank you so much, Amber, for this absolutely informative presentation. I think the malts are malt is something that is somehow very present in more of our lives, but few people, at least I am talking for myself, know about how this malt is produced or in which kind of buildings the malt is made. So this presentation was absolutely informative in that sense, and also it demonstrated how much industrial architecture is determined by the industrial processes carried out within it. So thank you very much, Amber. We will move now to our second presentation. As you know, the East-West workshops on industrial archaeology try to keep an eye on materiality, and also we try to prioritize archaeological approaches. But in the end, these workshops are fully multidisciplinary. So now we are going to have a very different perspective onto a very different drink. And that is going to be delivered by Dr. Pablo Alonso Gonzalez. That is one of the most versatile, actually, and productive researchers I have ever met. We met in Spain, I think it was something like 20 years ago when he was then an undergrad student, and I was delivering my very first lectures on industrial archaeology. He was an extremely good student to the point that he published a pair of books about the research that he did within the course. But very sadly enough, I was not able to keep him within industrial archaeology. So he moved to the UK, where he got a PhD and a master's degree in heritage studies from the University of Cambridge. And right after, she got another PhD in history from the University of León. He will not stay much within the heritage studies yet. And nowadays, he's a senior researcher at the Institute of Natural Products and Agrobiology of the Spanish National Research Council, where he has been recently awarded the very prestigious Consolidator grant of the European Research Council. So Pablo's interests include through his career, the anthropology of cultural heritage, both in Spain and Latin America. He has actually published plenty about this, and not only published articles and books, but even produced several movies. And more recently, he is working with the cultural heritage of wine in the Atlantic axis. That is the topic that he is going to develop today. So, Pablo, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juanma. 20 years already, so time goes by really quick. Let's make our best with our 20 minutes now. So what I'm going to present now is part of a research which involves material culture studies as well. So it's not specifically industrial archaeology, but it has a focus on material culture, and I did a historical research on how the division between the notion of natural and artificial wine was made between the 19th century and the mid of the 20th century in Spain. This is going to be published by Routledge in a monograph called The Making of Natural Wine in Spain. And it not only covers the Atlantic area, this actually covers the whole of Spain and in connection with France, Italy, and Portugal. But mostly I'm going to focus on the material culture aspects of this research in my presentation and trying to convey the main message throughout, which is how this division between natural and artificial was made and unmade during a long period of time, but now we take it for granted. Basically, this starts from a large research project that I had before my ERC, which was a natural wine project, focusing on the social movement of natural wine. You know, this is the movement that reclaims coming back to what they call a primitive form of making wine that is devoid of additives and contaminants and so on. But the roots of all this, of course, start with the Industrial Revolution, because before wine could not have artificial and synthetic additives. So all these problems start by the mid 19th century. Why this happens? If you know, there is a little a little insect called the Phylloxera bastatrix, which devastated the world vineyards mostly, but most importantly the French vineyards, which at the time, in the mid of the 19th century, were exporting with a huge value throughout the world. What happened was that Spain started to be the main exporter to France because France had no wine and the phylloxera had not come yet to Spain. It will take 20, 30 years more to come to Spain. So in this period, there is what I call the volume imperative. There is a massive demand for volume outstripped agricultural supply of grapes to the French industries. And Spain has to industrialize itself because Spain had a really artisan production method and despite Spanish wines were also famous, the sherry and many others, they didn't have this industrial outlook that they had in France already at the time. So Spain did an exhibition in Madrid, showing to the world the qualities of its different regions and types of wines, the bottles and the amphoras of Roman origin. You can see one in the left picture of the exhibition of Madrid of 1877 with the king and delegations from the UK, France, Russia, and all the main European powers, and also from South American countries like Chile and Argentina interested in wine production. So at the time also we see an explosion of new material culture associated with industrial winemaking. Not only phylloxera came as a plague, but also mildew and oidium were two new plagues that required industrial solutions to problems of globalization because these insects and fungus they were coming from the global commerce. So to the right, you can see new copper and zinc machines for spraying pesticides and spraying also copper and sulfur and so on to the vineyards to avoid fungus contamination. And below, you can see agricultural machinery, pumps, cauldrons to heat the wine and make it age quicker. All kinds of new material culture arrived to Spain, mostly from the UK and from France, but also there is an industrialization that is really quick in Catalonia. And indeed, these all these newspaper clips that I bring are from Barcelona. But as you see below, it says old succursale Noël from Paris. So the French are exporting to Spain their industrial output in the also to industrialize Spain to have cheap imports of grapes. Okay, so if we can explain it simply, and in Spain things are never simple because of the regional varieties and so on. There was a traditional model in which there was a localized production of grapes with vineyards close to the cellar. The pressing was made there, the fermentation was made there, and the bottle was made there with local consumption patterns or regional distribution. Okay, in barrels or in in the skin of the goat and so on. Really close markets. What happened with the arrival of railways, which in Spain took a lot of time to expand, starting in the late 70s, destroyed this regional isolation and basically in the areas of Rioja and Catalonia started to create industrial processes. So what happens is that we have heritage, industrial heritage from rural areas, but the industrial areas of Barcelona, Rioja, and so on have always been dynamic and growing. So we don't have many elements of isolation in terms of industrial heritage, like abandoned factories and so on, because the tendency has been to grow. As we will see in Sherry, the situation is different. There we have industrial archaeology potential because the region fell into a decay. So basically, the warehouses moved from vineyards to transit hubs. And we can see this in the Cava region. You know the Cava wine from Catalonia, which is like Prosecco or Champagne and sparkling wine. This is the most industrial wine that we find in Spain. But before that, we have to say that a big percentage of wine in Spain was completely adulterated. So it was also the process of a cumulative process of industrial revolutions. First, Most wines were made with dried grapes, raisins from Turkey mostly, and sugar, adding water and fermenting it, and then adding fuchsin and other aniline dyes to artificially mimic the color of the grape. And then German industrial alcohol was added because it was untaxed due to the commercial agreements between Spain and Germany. So basically, they will sell us industrial products and we will sell them agricultural products. Mostly like like today, this remains unchanged. So this, as a result of free trade policies, industrial wine could be manufactured rather than made almost entirely without fresh grapes. So a lot of new industries emerged around winemaking. It was a consortium, a consortia of industries, but not only industries evolved, also centers for control of adulteration. So throughout Spain, many enological stations were created. This one is from Penedès, which is the most important, together with Aro in La Rioja. Penedès is the region where cava is made, nearby Barcelona, and it was filled with laboratories and personnel checking the wines, analyzing, testing, and seeing how much of the wine exported to France and the world was being adulterated. So basically, this gave rise to a new sort of professionals that also created a lot of new material culture, which involved creating mobile laboratories to analyze wines. So if you, for instance, a French importer wanted to buy 1,000 liters of hectoliters of Spanish wine, they will call a guy like Federico Benesat. He will go with his cabinet and analyze if the wine was adulterated or not to guarantee that they were actually paying for legitimate wine. At the same time, people like Federico Benesat, which were chemists, all of them mostly from Barcelona, they will also publish books about how to sophisticate wine and how to adulterate wine. So they will sell the problem and the solution. And this created a crisis of authenticity because the state had to institutionalize analysis and homogenize the methods of analysis. So here are some old images from factories of cava, the sparkling wine in Barcelona, in the Barcelona area, which had a specific material culture for its making, involving not only the big barrels characteristic of wine in the Levante or the east part of Spain area, but also all the methods for bottling, keeping the bottles up and down and turning them throughout the time, and so on. It was also related, the expansion of the cava industry was related to the modernist architectural movement promoted by people, architects like Gaudí. Probably this is one you know, the guy who made the Sagrada Familia. And you can see big factories that now use their heritage in Catalonia as a tourist reclaim. So you can make a wine tasting in these places. Uh, and this is an announcement in Spain by the enological cabinet of Federico Benesat. And as I said, he was selling the products to adulterate the wine and also the assays to, to guarantee you that the wine is not adulterated. But here he says, I produce reports relating to the fabrication of wines from raisins, petiotage, and other artificial wines authorized in France by the decree July this year. Also, I sell machines and all kinds of apparatuses for the fabrication of wine and other liquids. So you can see that at this point, wine was totally an industrial product made by pharmaceutical companies because Federico Benesat, he was a chemist pharmaceutical, as you see here. Also, the wine and adulteration changed the material grid of cities. For instance, in the case of Madrid and many the major cities in Spain, there was a fiscal barrier because there were heavy municipal taxes, the consumos, and these were paid at the gates of Madrid. So if you wanted to import, you had a tavern and you wanted to get into Madrid 1,000 liters of wine, you had to pay a lot of taxes. What was the result? That the tavern owners would add water and other chemicals to the wine to stretch. So to stretch the wine. So if you bought 1,000 liters of real wine, you could make 2,000 liters of fabricated or artificial wine for the same money, or really cheap because water was free and some additives. As a result, Madrid taverns became the epicenter of an underground economy, refilling barrels with artificial mixtures to maximize profit margins. And this changes the idea of consumption and also the structure of the taverns, because as we see in this picture from 1920, at the time the Valdepeñas wines were the most famous in Madrid, and then taverns had to create a back area of the tavern, if you call it, if you want to call it, where they will make wine. I mean, fabricate new wine. So this changed the infrastructure of the. And well, you can see in the left in the picture, they are adding Campeche alcohol, water, aniline, which is a dye, and also blood from animals to give color. This was a traditional practice throughout Europe, adding blood and so on. And also, another material culture related to the quest for authenticity was the grid. This was created in Rioja, and today it looks like a symbol of quality and standard quality in Rioja. But this was the result of all these fraud practices. If they wanted to guarantee authenticity, and for this the grid was created. Only the consumers were told to ask for the grid to be taken away at the restaurant, just at the moment of serving the wine. Okay, but in any case, this did not happen. This did not took long for the taverns to also adulterate and copy and do it at the tavern itself. So it remained as a symbol of authenticity and an attempt to guarantee authenticity. But this didn't actually work, and it's now today is going to be prohibited. So probably next year is going to be the last time we see the traditional grid in one of the most famous wines in Spain, which is Marqués de Riscal, where you can make wine tastings back to the 1862, 63, and these wines they have to get out the grid, and this is one of the best moments in the tasting. You can see this wine is 1953, and it still has the grid. Also, there was a huge moment of wine riots in Rioja, which will also take place in France some years later. And this involved the destruction of material culture in many places, basically in Aro. Aro is the main place for the distribution of Rioja wines. The major and largest winemaking companies are in this spot, next to a big river, a railway transport station, and the mob attempted to destroy the railway station and so on because the riots basically were complaining that because such a huge amount of artificial wine was being made, the price of the grapes was coming down and down and down, and the peasants could not have a decent money making from the grape producing process. Oh, sorry. So in Aro, you can still see these wagons that have the name of the company. Again, to avoid falsification and so on, they will take the wagon to the train. So you had like the train and a wagon or three of one company, one from another company, and so on. And this is interesting in terms of material culture because it shows that there was no state transport system. It was like a private owned system of transportation. And also in Rioja, the traditional systems still exists, existed until recently, even in the 60s or 70s. This is a picture from the mid 20th century, Franco dictatorship period, in which the wine is being transported by mules in demijohns. Okay, and in Rioja, the material culture was quite related to the French system of oak barrels with French oak, aging the wine in big barrels and pressing the wine with the Bordeaux style. So all the material culture and industrial production processes in Rioja were brought from France, which makes it rather different from Catalonia, which had its own industry in producing the materials they needed for their own production process. In Rioja, it was mostly imported materials and even French capital in the wine cooperatives. So these uprisings in Rioja were the precedent of the famous uprisings in 1907 in Montpellier, which brought together even military groups, 1 million peasants, or half a million peasants, if I'm not wrong, with the motto or down with fraud, supporting natural wine, and so on. And the material culture was important because there were a lot of charts with sugar brought down and so on. There was also a relation between the identity of the south of France related with the bull, as in Spain, the bullfighting and so on, against the le sucre, the sugar, as the problem of adulteration and winemaking with water and sugar. Then, if we move to the Jerez sherry area, which was in decay after the British capital went out with the Napoleonic Wars, there was a tendency to maintain the quality of the wine, but the number of cellars decreased, and there was an attempt to defend and support natural wine, winemaking without industrial outputs. Jerez and the sherry wine and Jerez region were obviously quite far away from the boundaries with France and away from industrialization. So they remain stuck in the old industrialization that the British had brought in the 19th century with large, what they call cathedrals in Jerez, which are large cellars with huge roofs and so on, made to ripen the wine and to be fresh in the hot summers of Jerez. If anyone has been to Jerez, it can get to 40 degrees easily in the summer, and this is obviously not great for the wines, and therefore these buildings were designed for this. And to the right, we have Lucio Bascuñana, who was a pharmacist who defended and advocated for natural sherry and natural wine overall. For decades, he was advocating this defense of natural wine. I spent 1 month in Jerez taking pictures of old cellars. Some of them abandoned, some others are just in work, but they look abandoned, like this one to the right, Fundador. Some of them are just, if they don't sell, they keep the wine for decades until someone takes over the company and starts a new marketing campaign based on the old wines of Fundador or whatever. So Jerez is probably for industrial archaeology of wine one of the hot spots in the world because of the large, I mean, because of the size of the places and the specific architecture that they have, and the specific barrels, which are different from the traditional American and oak barrels that we see and also from the due to the velo de flor, I, I will know how to translate this, but there's this winemaking standard in sherry, which derives from having a yeast floating over the wine that oxidizes the wine to the sack point. And there's also examples of an attempt to industrialize the cellars in Jerez. This is González bias, which was an attempt to bring in modernist architecture from Gaudí to Jerez within English, British capital together with local capital, making this huge cellar with metal and so on, which was rather a fiasco because Jerez didn't take flight again industrially. So basically, I want you to get this message that the Spanish wine moved from an absolute ban of artificial wine to what we drink today. And I think that's the message that I want to convey in my book is that today we are drinking a wine that has 60 additives allowed in additives and oenological compounds allowed in Europe. In the United States and Brazil, for instance, it is much more, even close to 150. And I try to trace this process through the industrial practices and their ups and downs, their fights, their how laws changed back and forth, and the debates between the state, economic forces, and agricultural forces and producers. The paradox is that the state realized that it could not compete globally without industrializing and standardizing wines, just with natural wines from Spain. And this is what had happened to sherry. So if the wine sector in Spain wanted to survive economically, the legal definition of what pure and natural wine had to be quietly expanded to include the laboratory practices, some of which we have seen, including sulfur dioxide, fining agents, citric acid, and many others. So at the moment of the Republic, when the Republic took power in Spain in 1932, 22 industrial additives were allowed, and the denominations of origin started to be created at that moment. After that, the Franco dictatorship just brought the wine sector to a standstill and basically created the so-called wine cooperatives, which are industrial buildings made with brick and tiles, where all the peasants from a region had to bring their grapes and basically standardize the wine. For me, this has not so much interest, so I didn't bring it here. Most of these cellars are still in use or are in the process of abandonment or reconversion to other industries. And today, what we see is a process of trying to use this heritage in Spain for tourism purposes. So the concept that I bring forward as a conclusion is the notion of fictio iuris, a legal fiction. This is the legal principle whereby the law accepts an assumption as true, even if it is factually false, in order to resolve a complex systemic issue, such as the definition of natural wine. Today, the Spanish law of wine still defines wine as a fermented drink made of fermented grapes. But this is not true. This is what it constitutes a legal fiction. Thank you very much. Here I leave the synthesis of the material dialectic of the Spanish wine. You can contact me if you have any questions. Please make them for me because I'm in paternity leave, so I have a baby next to me which needs to be tended for. So I hope this could be understood. I know it's a lot of complexity, but I think for this applies mostly to Italy, which followed a similar process. Portugal is a bit different because Portugal had a huge connection to the British Empire, had a lot of British capital invested in regions such as Douro. And so maybe there was a move from the capital in Jerez to Douro as England in the British Empire had to stop the commerce with Spain with the Napoleonic Wars. So all of this history is totally connected with the material culture that we are seeing here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Pablo, for this fantastic presentation that shows very much how science, technology, and industry are totally interconnected. And special thanks even because you are doing a particular effort to doing this, since, as you have just said, you are on your paternity leave now. So normally, as you know, everybody knows, we have the discussion section at the end of the workshop. But since Pablo may need to leave soon, it's the right moment now to make any questions. So if anyone has any question for Pablo, please open your microphone now or use the chat facility to make the question because Pablo will not be able to answer later.
Yeah, otherwise you can contact me. Well, you have my email in the call. So if you have any question, you can email me, or if you have something to tell me now, this is the moment.
Yeah, I will share your email later in the chat facility too.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Thanks. Well, I have a pair of questions actually, if nobody else has. One is very much related to the topic you have presented. The other one is curiosity I have. The one that is more related is that, well, every time I take a bottle of wine, I read these sulfites among the ingredients. So I don't know exactly what these sulfites are, what are they for, and in particular when they started to be added to the wine. And the second question that is less related, but of course, talking about Spanish wine is a question that I believe may come to the mind of many people, is why Tempranillo is so popular in Spain, but it's kind of not so popular in the rest of the world. Because, I am not an expert in wine, but every time I have seen a Tempranillo wine or Tempranillo grapes, they come from Spanish wine. I don't know if this has always been the situation, like Tempranillo has always been the choice of winemakers in Spain, or this started later, or why Tempranillo is so characteristic of Spain.
Yeah, relating to sulfur dioxide, it was initially brought to wine by the Romans from the mines in Sicily in the Etna volcano, and still there are mines of sulfur. But with the Industrial Revolution, sulfur started to be synthetically produced from other products, basically oil, unrefined oil, and so on. And for many centuries, it was used as a preservative. But obviously, in the Middle Ages, it was not easy to get sulfur from the Etna mountains and so on. So for many centuries, wine was spoiled so easily. So in the Industrial Revolution, adding sulfites was one of the easiest ways of preserving the wine from oxidation. It is an antifungal, antimicrobial, and so on. And today it is the only thing that has to be mentioned in the bottle because it can cause allergies. There are people who are allergic to sulfites. And the other 60, 65 products do not need to be mentioned because there are not known consequences for drinking them once. And so, yeah, sulfur, only the natural wine movement has reclaimed sulfur-free winemaking in today's wine scene. And regarding Tempranillo, it was exported to California at some point. But the problem with Tempranillo and in general with the Spanish wine is that wine in Spain was never associated with quality. It was associated and is still associated with quantity, a lot, and low price. And this is a consequence of what we have seen today. Wine became industrial in Spain, came to be known in the world scene as a bulk product, mostly adulterated, mixed with water and other additives and so on. So coming out of this image of Spanish wine has taken decades, and still Spain is the main bulk exporter in the world at really low prices, despite we now have top quality wines as France, as Italy, and so on. But this idea of Tempranillo associated with Rioja has taken 1 century for Rioja to be proud of it. For a century, it was a debate if we should mention the grape and so on, because France created this industrial model in which a grape was associated with a region. The you have the Chardonnay from Bourgogne and so on. But Spain never did that. Spain was just seeking big producing varieties, and Tempranillo is not one of them. And indeed, in Rioja, they had to cut other varieties to focus on Tempranillo because it's a high quality wine producing. I mean, it has really, really tiny grapes for winemaking, not these big grapes that they use in Castile-La Manche for huge volumes and so on. But still, California tried to make wines with Tempranillo, also Australia, but they realized that it was not a name that they can put in a bottle. The New World, instead of regions, uses varieties. In Australia, they plant Albarino, Chardonnay, blah, blah, to avoid competing with the Old World for the region name. Because the region name, of course, France wins, Italy wins, Spain wins. So they need to use the variety. And Tempranillo never stuck as a variety in the world market. It is all French varieties. Even Chile and Argentina, they use French varieties for their marketing, Malbec and so on. So I think this is a product of a long history.
Good. Thank you, Pablo. Any other questions, please? So, well, Pablo, thank you very much for your very educational talk. Now we know what we are drinking when we drink Spanish wine or wine in general. And thank you very much for making this effort to share your work with us during your paternity leave. Thank you, Pablo.
Thank you very much, Juanma, for the invitation, and for the others, I'm sorry, but I have to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we move to our last drink of the day, that is going to be baijiu from China, where Dr. Yuchen Wang is waiting for us. She is an associate professor at the Institute for Cultural Heritage and the History of Science and Technology of the University of Science and Technology, Beijing, which means that I have the pleasure of working with her together in the same department. And besides, I have had also the pleasure of drinking baijiu with her several times, and I hope that many more times will come. So Yuchen's research is, she has different lines of research actually, but the most prominent ones are linear cultural heritage and also industrial heritage, with a particular interest on historical transportation routes and also very modern industrial heritage. Actually, perhaps some of you may remember Yuchen from our second workshop called The New Generation, in which she made a very interesting presentation on the heritage of the display electronic industry. She got a bachelor degree in architecture from Huazhong University of Science and Technology. From there, she moved to Italy, where she got a master's degree in architecture too from Politecnico di Milano, and also a master's degree in cultural heritage offered in a joint program by the University of Turin, the Politecnico di Torino, and UNESCO. After that, she came back to China, where she got her PhD in archaeology from Peking University with a specialty in cultural heritage studies. Yu Chengwan is also a very active researcher who has contributed or led many projects and publications, and even two invention patents. And today she's going to talk about one of her latest papers, which is about baijiu in China. So Yuchen, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Juan. Thank you for the introduction. I'll share my screen first. Okay. Now you can see. Now you can see that, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. A minute. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Yuchen. Today I will talk about the baijiu, the traditional Chinese liquor. As Juan just mentioned, maybe it's not so well known international, but I think maybe every Chinese know the baijiu, and also they drink maybe after they grown up. So I will start from the introduction of the drinking culture in ancient China. And then the study case of Luzhou baijiu heritage, and to explain why Luzhou baijiu heritage can be understood as a typical urban cultural landscape. So first, I would like to begin with a brief introduction to the cultural part. As we may know that the human history has always been accompanied with the alcohol, and China also developed an alcoholic beverages at very early stage. We can see here there is a archaeological evidence that we found in Jiahu, and also here's other evidence from other sites, and suggests they all together, and other sites suggest that the history of the alcohol in China can be traced back to around 6,000 years ago. But we see all the alcoholic beverage here made from fruit, and they have a lower degree. So it's different from baijiu, which is high alcohol distilled spirit. And then we can see here the ancient Chinese distillation techniques, which is closely associated with alchemy and Taoism, and could be traced back to the Western Han Dynasty. And this technique, even though it developed very early, but was used to produce baijiu from the Yuan Dynasty, which is from around 30th century and 40th centuries. So as we can also see here, the baijiu became a common drink in Ming Dynasty and won a greater popularity in the Qing Dynasty here. And as I mentioned, the starting point for baijiu production is Yuan Dynasty, and it's supported by archaeological evidence. As we can see here, it's Lidu baijiu site in Jiangxi province. This is the fermentation cellars, and it was found in the Yuan dynasties as archaeological layers. This is currently the earliest known archaeological site associated with baijiu production. However, although Lidu is the earliest known site, it's not a living heritage site. As for baijiu, the idea of living continuity is very important. That could be one of the most significant differences between Chinese baijiu and other types of heritage of the alcoholic, such as wine or brandy or other type. At this point, maybe I need to briefly introduce the production technology of baijiu in order to explain why it's so important, why it's matters so much. Here is a production map I draw about the baijiu, and it's not simply a mechanical process of fermentation and distillation. The key lines in the continuous survival and reproduction of the microbial communities. So we can see the microorganism lives in the mud cellar, which is like this way, and participated in a complex process of the biochemical reaction, including the saccharification and esterification. So in the case of the strong flavor baijiu, as 泸州老窖, the mud cellar, which is here, themselves become a biochemical vessel. So the longer a cellar has been used continuously, the richer and more stable the microbial community becomes. So this is precisely the source of the baijiu's flavor. So let's now return to the point I just mentioned. Lidu is the earliest known baijiu heritage site, but it is no longer in continuous use. So how early can we trace the cellar that's still being used today? So one of the earliest example is the 泸州老窖, which contains 4 Ming Dynasty cellars. These cellars are still in use today, and the age of the cellar is not based on the traditional archaeological proof, as in the case of Lidu. Instead, it is inferred from the production logic of baijiu itself. As I just explained, we can study the microbial communities in today's cellars and to use them to infer the duration of the continuously used time, and therefore the approximately date when the cellar were first established. Moreover, because the baijiu production has a high degree of the geographical stability, the current location of the cellar is basically as the same as its original location. This is also an important precondition for the research. In total, we can see here in Luzhou Laojiao, my case, we have 1,619 cellars with a history of over 100 years that could be dated back to Ming and Qing dynasty. And they are in 16 brewery workshops today. So now let's take a closer look at the remains of Luzhou Laojiao. There are altogether 16 workshops, and the table summarizes here the detailed information. So from the perspective of the construction date of the present building, they can be divided into three groups. So here I should clarify the differences between two dates. One is the first built date, and the other one is the date of the present workshop building. So the first built date refers to the beginning of the liquor production in a workshop. That is the time when the cellars began to be used, and the construction date of the present building refers to the date of the current architecture, the structure that cover the cellars. So according to the construction date of the present building, the workshops can be divided into three groups. And the three groups show clearly differences in building scale and spatial layout. So let's see the first group. The Chunherong workshop is representative example of the first group of the workshop. Dates from the late Qing dynasty to the early Republican period. In contrast to the workshop built in later period, the building plan here we can see is mostly irregular in the shape, with the floor area smaller, which is from 600 to 1600 square meter, and a strong relationship to the ancient urban fabric context. And also, the cellar arranged in a relatively less regular way and smaller scale. And here it's a second group of workshop, which can be dates from the 1950s to 1980s. So we can see here, compared to the other ones built in the latest previous period and the later period, their plan are significantly more regular, with the floor area ranging from 1,200 to 3,000 square meter, share a highly similar plan type as we can see here. Daxinghe is a very has a very regular rectangular plan with an entrance on the other side, on the short side, and also there is stacking dam, steamer, cooling dam all together here, and with a cellar area on the opposite way. Here is the third group of the workshop, which can be dates after the 1980s. So the workshop of this period are larger in scale, with a change in structure to the use of reinforced concrete column and steel trusses. So in terms of the layout, the workshops can be divided into two categories. One of which is the workshop where we can see here, for example, it's Wen Yongsheng workshop. We can see here there are 4 old cellars, could be dated to Ming Dynasty. It remain in the central part, and here there are several irregular cellars in the upper part, and this part is built later. And the other category, including the Xiecheng, Quanji, and also Shunchangxiang, with the floor area ranging from 3,600 to 13,600 square meter. Sorry. There are more cellars and also more facilities, the stacking time, the steamers, and also we can see there is more or less a modern factory. And also if we classify the workshop according to their first build date, they can also be divided into 3 groups. And by this time, the classification is now based on the building size, not only based on the architectural structure, it's based on their location within the city. So on this map, we can clearly see that the workshop are distributed in 3 areas. These 3 areas are located in the old urban area of Luzhou, which are divided into 3 parts by 2 rivers. Here is Yangtze River and here is Tuo River. If we arrange all the workshops on the map according to their first build dates, we can identify a clear spatial temporal pattern for that. So here is a bigger map for that. We can see this part is in Goutou, and the dot line in red, it's the ancient wall for Ming and Qing dynasty, and it's the starting point for the urban area. So before the Yongzheng period of Qing dynasty, that is before 1723, baijiu workshop were concentrated in the Goutou area, where it's old city, and between the Yongzheng and Tongzhi period from 1723 to 1874, workshop began to appear in the upper part, in the northern part, Xiaoshi area, across the river. And then during the Qianlong and Jiaqing period from 1736 to 1820, there are 3 new workshops established in the Goutou area, in the ancient part. And later, they will be relocated to the Luohan area, which is on the smaller map, is here. So it's far away from the ancient part, but we can see there are also 3 historical workshops that now remain in the Luohan area, apart from the 3 relocated one. And they were first established in the late Qing dynasty and the early Republican period, roughly between the 1840 to 1928. And this was exactly the period when the Luohan area was developing into an important market town outside the old town of Luzhou. So if we take into account the development process of Luzhou Old City area, the pattern become easier to understand and to be explained. The urban expansion of ancient Luzhou followed a gradual process from the west to the east, from Goutou and then to Xiaoshi, and then later to Luohan. So therefore, the location of the baijiu making workshop was closely related to the development of the city. When the new workshops were established, they turned to be located in newly developed and commercially active urban area. So was this distribution pattern a coincidence? So this answer comes to our 3rd part today, spatial temporal distribution and the underlying causes. So if we look at other baijiu heritage sites, although they do not preserve as many old workshops as the Luzhou Laojiao did, but we can see also they have the similar pattern. They are all located in the urban center of their period. And we can see here, this is Shui Jingfang in Chengdu. Here is Lidu in Jingxian and Wuliangye in Yichang, and other baijiu sites is all like this way. So this distribution is clearly different from other kind of alcoholic heritage sites, such as wine. Here we see the Piemonte in Italy, and the whiskey, brandy. These sites are often located in rural areas or on the outskirts of towns. So in fact, many of these alcoholic heritage sites have been inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage Site as rural cultural landscape. And in the contrast, the important characteristic of baijiu is the relationship with the city. So the feature clearly distinguished it from other type of alcoholic heritage and may be understood as a potential outstanding value. So why did this distribution pattern emerge? So there are three main reasons for that: the raw materials, the transportation, and the labor force. So first is about the raw materials. So baijiu is made from grains. So this means that the production site does not have to be very close or directly attached to the place where the raw materials were grown. So in a contrast, the production sites of the wine and many other distilled spirit are often located close to the cultivation area of the raw materials. In these cases, the distance to the raw material source is one of the most important factor in workshop location. So one possible explanation is that compared with other raw materials such as grapes or sugarcane, the grain are easier to store and transport. However, the explanation is not enough. As we can see here, the whiskey is also made from grains, but whiskey distilleries are still mostly located in rural areas. And sake is also made from rice. Compared with whiskey, sake has more similarity with baijiu in terms of production scale and technical process, and the distribution of sake beverages is still quite different from baijiu workshop. For example, we can see here is the famous Nadagogo sake producing area in Japan. The sake barrels do not show one single spatial preferences. Some are concentrated in town centers in order to face a market, while others are in rural areas, maybe to stay closer to the raw material production. So therefore, the fact that grains are easy to store and transport, it's certainly one important reason behind the spatial distribution of the workshop, of the baijiu workshop, but it's not the only one. So let's take a look at the second reason, the transportation. So both the raw materials and the final product of baijiu are large in volume and heavy in weight. So therefore, production sites turn to be located in places with convenient transport and relatively low transportation cost. Several typical example, for example, the Jingfang, Wuliangye, Lidu, Jiannanchun shows this very clearly. And the third one is the labor force. Every stage of the traditional baijiu production requires a large amount of manual labor. It therefore depends on a certain number of stable works. So unlike many other handicraft industries that can be operated over the year, baijiu production is strongly seasonal. its brewing process depends on the fermentation of qu, and qu is highly sensitive to the environmental temperature. The hot season, like the summer, is not suitable for the most production activities. So we can see even today, the traditional baijiu workshops do suspend almost all production activities in summer. As a result, the agricultural slack season after the autumn harvest basically corresponds to the period when baijiu production requires the most intensive labor. However, the farmers who were only temporarily available during the slack season can only support small-scale household production. They were not sufficient for sustain the large-scale one. So therefore, the cities where the non-agricultural populations were concentrated became the preferred location for the baijiu making workshops. So in cities, it's much easier to obtain a relatively stable labor force. So far, I have used the case of Luzhou Laojiao as example to discuss the spatial distribution of baijiu heritage and the deeper industrial logic behind it. From this case, we can identify a set of heritage values that different from other alcoholic heritage. And also the efforts are also currently underlay to prepare baijiu for World Heritage nomination. I actually still remember that when I present this topic and the other time, and Juan was also there. He asked me a question like, why should baijiu be inscribed as the World Heritage compared with other type of alcohol? It's not very well known in the world internationally. Actually, I couldn't figure out the answer in the other time, but here I have the second chance to answer it. Perhaps, perhaps today, Juan's question for me is that anyway, my answer would be like the drinking culture diversity. And also the cultural diversity is a key point for the UNESCO Heritage nomination. And Chinese baijiu, from its raw materials to the production technology, from the spatial distribution pattern to the drinking culture, represents a distinctive culture system. So it demonstrates the diversity of alcoholic culture in the world. So I think this drinking culture diversity is also exactly what this workshop has shown today. So I gave a response to Juan's question the last time, and also I believe it is a suitable point at which to end my presentation today. So here's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yichen. As a matter of fact, I was planning to make that question later, so it's great that you already
Sorry.
answered. No, it's perfectly okay. I have others. Uh, so,
Okay.
well, thank you, and I would like to let everybody know that Yichen is today with a flu and a little bit of fever,
Oh,
so we are
yeah.
particularly grateful for the effort she's doing in delivering this very interesting talk to us that I think it has been very helpful to give more visibility to Baijiu beyond China. So at this moment, everybody is very welcome to use their cameras and microphones if you want to, and we still have some 25 minutes that we can use to talk more with Amber and Yuchen. If you feel more comfortable, you can also text your questions on the chat facility. So I think I will break the ice. That is something that sometimes needs to be done when you are preparing your drinks. I have a pair of questions for each of you. I will make all my questions first, if you prefer so, and later you can answer in turns. So for Amber, I have never seen so many maltings or malting buildings in any other country. So, of course, in the case of whiskey, the production of whiskey is much more concentrated in a few countries, but almost every country produces beer. So I wonder whether there is a particular high concentration of maltings in the UK and perhaps other countries don't produce malt, they just import it from elsewhere, or perhaps it's that in the UK these buildings have been better preserved than elsewhere, because right now I cannot remember any other example anywhere. And my second question for Amber too is that in some of the buildings that you have shown, or particularly in the building in the cover of your book, we can see this kind of pyramidal roof that is in the building where the kiln is located. But this kind of roof that I understand is actually a chimney is only present in some of the buildings. So I would like to ask why some buildings use this kind of roof and why others don't, and also whether this kind of building is actually necessary and just a regular chimney or a stack, sorry, could make the same could make the same function, could have the same function. And as for Yuchen, I also have a pair of questions, the heritage question. That one I will skip it. First, you mentioned and you have also shown that there has been changes in the building materials used in these workshops. The oldest ones worked with brick and timber, and the newest with concrete and steel. So I wonder whether these materials are only related with the evolution of architecture and the arrival of new building materials and techniques, that is, the buildings were modernized, or whether they are actually reflecting changes in the production process as well. I don't know if new building materials meant that new ways of producing baijiu were developed at the same time. And my second question is whether there are any examples of baijiu workshops also in rural areas, since you have emphasized it, that one of the characteristics or the differences even of baijiu heritage with other drinks is that these baijiu workshops are inserted in urban context in cities. So these are my questions for the two of you.
Thank you, Juan. As I was asked first, I better go first. Yes, there are maltings across Europe. The southern part of Europe will obviously be wine producing, and we've already mentioned about Spain and France, but northern France, and I did mention at the end that my European knowledge comes from secondary sources, and I have actually brought evidence of them, and one of them is that one in the uh, northern part of Calais. And from that, it is actually clear that there were a substantial number of floor maltings, as well as pneumatic maltings. And once you start to go further north, Alsace and into Germany, then again, what I think may well be the case is that we, and certainly where I am concerned, don't have the publications. And you've mentioned my book, which I'll come on to the kiln aspect in a minute. Malting, I think, everywhere is a much more hidden industry. In consequence, because there is a tendency to think at the brewing end, in other words, the actual brewing process, as opposed to the bit that goes before. And the other part, when I say, oh, I work on maltings, or I show photographs of kilns, the immediate reaction is actually hops. But going back to Germany, and in fact, one of my last comment on the slide, my last but one slide, was in indirect firing, i.e. when the combustion gases don't go through the kilning malt. Because in the last 12 months, I've had two queries from Europe, one from Poland and one from the Czech Republic, because there appears to be a thought that indirect firing came from this country. In fact, as far as I can judge, it didn't. I'm not saying that we weren't thinking about it. I'm simply saying that there isn't evidence for a substantial transfer of information. So that those two sources, those two contacts have certainly indicated to me that there was, whether I would say extensive, but certainly a sufficient malting industry in what I would refer to as Northern Europe, in other words, brewing countries as opposed to wine countries. I mean, there's a malting industry in Scotland. Well, that might be considered part of the UK, but also in Southern Ireland, and as opposed to, as I'm saying here, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. There is evidence of a malting industry in the Americas and to a limited extent in the South Americas. It's not, I think in this country, perhaps we've got what I would refer to as particularly distinctive buildings. I wonder if I can find a photograph of a French malting that is sufficiently adequate. The answer is probably not. Not sure whether that one there is going to come out adequately. But again, it is a small kiln and it's a pyramidal roofed kiln. Dear me, which one is it? Late 1890s date-wise. The floors don't seem to be as extensive, and that's the brasserie. It'll take me too long to go into any further. With regard to the German end, I was lucky enough to have some documents on the malting industry at the end of the Second World War taken detailed by us. And again, there's a lovely reference there because that some German brewers prefer floor malt, which is what English brewers have also said for quite some time. I should emphasize that pneumatic malting and doubled floor kilns were far more popular and successful in Europe than they were in this country. Kilning, so I'll now get on to the kiln that is in my book. It's a pyramidal, it can be a cone structure, and the need is to draw the hot air that is produced by the furnace below through the kilning malt and out because it is damp. So ideally you don't really want it staying in the building. Initially you have cowls. In those, I think there will be a fan. And in other kilns, there are it's forced draft from the bottom. In other words, the hot air is pushed up through. It's in pressure kilns that you have flat ceilings, but in ordinary, old-fashioned, if you like, where your combustion gases are going through your malt, you need to draw the gases, the hot air up through and out. And so you get this pyramidal shape, which in here, the extent of the need for a pyramid will to some extent be governed by the geography of the area. Because I've mentioned about cowls turning into the wind, you will need tall cowls, as I showed at Midworth Street, if the surroundings, not that that was the case for that particular illustration, are such that you're not going to get a good draw. Most of the survivors, and I mean, if you look at hop kilns, they're round. The same principle applies. They can be round, or they can be square, or they can be long. But if they are long, they tend to have internal pyramids within. And the other thing to say, and I don't think I showed any of the images showed it, is that sometimes your kiln is completely hidden within your ordinary malthouse roof. Externally, that is. Internally, it will have an internal pyramid. Does that give you a sufficient answer?
Absolutely, absolutely. A very informative answer. You very much deserve the Peter Neverson Award that you got last year. Your expertise is very impressive.
Thank you
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you. Eugene, please.
Okay, so about the first question is about the change of the materials, right? So actually, I think it's mainly because the first one you mentioned is about the revolution of the architecture. As actually for the baijiu, we have also the process mentioned by the Pablo, yeah, the craft to industry. So for the craft baijiu, we are talking about all the remains here and all the archaeological things here. It's all about the craft part. And for the industry part, for the industry baijiu, maybe it's because of the change of the production. Am I clear? I don't know because I myself is not in a perfect status for that. Anyway,
We know.
anyway, so yeah, it's about the change of the architecture only. It's not about the production things. And for the second question, I don't know whether I get it well or not. Are you asking me if there is any workshop for the baijiu in the rural area?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I think it's not in rural area, but at least there is a, let's say, county area for the craft baijiu. Yeah, actually I haven't seen one in the village or the rural area. I mean, in that time, maybe in the ancient time, it's city, and now it's rural area. It happens. It happens because yeah, it changed. But anyway, at the time, as the historic time, it at least a county. Yeah, that's my question. Sorry.
No, no, very good answer. Thank you very much, Eugene. Anybody else has any other questions, please? You can use the chat facility if you prefer so, if English is not your first language, or if you are a little bit shy.
But anyone, if you want, you can contact me. I have my email at the last the last slide of my presentation. So, yeah, I should, yeah. Anyway, okay.
If you want, you can text your email also in the chat facility so people
Yeah.
can contact you.
I can respond to that later.
Okay, no problem. So, well, I guess that is going to be all for today. I think it's 7 here, 12 in the UK. I see some friends from Brazil also here. Maybe for them it's a little bit too early to start drinking. But today I'm feeling a little bit British. I have an IPA here with me that I will now have to celebrate together with to celebrate 10 editions of the workshop, 5 years that we have been doing this. Thank you very much to all the speakers we have had so far. Thank you very much in particular for the 3 speakers we have today. Thanks to Bill also that is always there making everything work smooth. And cheers. Hope to see you in November too. Cheers.